Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of the Finish More Music podcast. We've got a fun topic today, at least I think it is. As always, you be the judge, you'll have the last word. This one is all about the future of music. Electronic music is what we'll be focusing on, but really music in general. And it's fair to say that right now there are a hell of a lot of genres. If you follow electronic music, if you go on any of the well-known websites such as Beatport, you'll see a near infinite number of genres have appeared. And with all of the music that exists in the world and all of these new genres and subgenres and sub-subgenres in existence right now, I think it would be easy to conclude or to assume that there's little point in trying to create something truly new. And we've even had people on this podcast saying that there isn't anything unique left to make. That's to say, it's just really filling in the gaps. It's a slight variation on what there is at the moment. And when you look at all the genres that are out there and you say, okay, we had techno and we had house, and then bang in the middle of that became tech house, and then there are variations on that and things that are now bouncy this and disco that, and lots of different connotations of something that is essentially very, very closely related to what went before. And when we look at it in that way, a question could come up into one's mind that says, is there any point trying to shape the future and to look for something that really is exciting, new, and innovative? And I think it's fair to say that we'd all like to think there are no boundaries to music, instead of thinking this is it. I can make something cool, but it's just a slightly refined version of what exists now. For me personally, I think a limitless future with infinite possibilities to discover new and exciting music sounds that much more interesting and that much more inspiring. And maybe you don't think that, but I suspect that you do. And I think it's better than the approach of that might leave us, or the perspective rather, that might leave us feeling despondent. So saying, well, the good old days, like the days we had Jesse Saunders on the podcast, episode 188, where he was talking about the invention of house music and him creating the very first house music record in existence. And it was exciting. I mean, I was just absolutely riveted listening to this guy speaking about it, the nostalgia and being taken back into that time. And for a lot of people, they look and think, well, the good old days where the creation of something new is gone. Everyone's already made and taken all of the real breakthroughs and the big exciting things that we could do. And as a fan of music, and of course we all are as creatives, you've got to be a fan of the music. If you're a writer, you got to read books. If you're creating music, you got to listen to music. It feeds the muse. It's an incredibly important part of it. And as fans of music, if we're despondent, saying, well, this is all I'm ever going to hear, this some various iterations of it, I think it would be easy to become despondent and maybe to think that the future of music is a little bit bleak. It's just paint by numbers now. It's the same old stuff, people copying people. Now, I don't like the idea that there's a limited amount of wonder to be curious about left in the world. And if you don't, then perhaps you would consider the perspective that I'm going to lay out as the bulk of this podcast. So in order to do it, let's just jump back in time and jump back to the golden age of classical music composers. So way back when, in the golden age of classical music, the people who created it, the composers, began figuring out that there were a finite number of note combinations and an even smaller number of note combinations that were pleasing to the ear. So the fact is, there are only 12 notes in the Western scale, and they are made even fewer if you limit yourself to a mode. So a scale, for example, that's been built that is pleasing to the ear. And therefore, there can only be so many combinations. And about a century ago, On the heels of the modernists Stravinsky and Schoenberg, musicologists lamented that we had exhausted the language of music, explored its final frontiers, and depleted its finite resources. So that's a kind of little soundbite, if you like, that I grabbed off the internet. So think about that. Musicologists lamented a century ago that we'd exhausted the language of music. We'd explored its final frontiers and depleted its finite resources. And there was a guy, Arnold Schoenberg, he developed the influential 12-tone system. So that was hey, I'm ripping up the rule books of these modes and scales, and it was a radical departure from the major and minor and the familiar language. And he was like, no, this, I'm going to really push this stuff, which he did. However, still limited in certain people's view to the fact that there are 12 notes, and this is only going as far as it's going, and we've pretty much reached the boundaries and the limits of it. Now, as we now know, that isn't the case. In melody alone, there's a lot more to it than just a sequence of notes. So when I looked this up, there's a guy, Marcus du Sautoy, I think it's pronounced, Sautoy, a mathematician. And he said, look, there's an even greater range of possibilities when it comes to composing melodies than just writing sentences. So more possibilities when it comes to composing melodies than there is when writing sentences. And that's because musical parameters aren't confined to the notes of whichever scale you are using. And we know that, right? There's rhythmic articulation, precise tuning, loudness, timbre, and I haven't even gotten to synthesizers and all the various different things that we're able to employ now over the top of it. And when you factor all of those things in, he said it's even less likely that those mythical monkeys at their typewriters and keyboards would come up with a tune like the opening of Mozart's Marriage of Figaro than they would generate a line of Shakespeare. So, in case you're not familiar with this, this is the infinite monkey theorem, which states that a monkey hitting keys at random on a typewriter for an infinite amount of time will almost surely type any given text, such as the complete works of William Shakespeare. This is a French guy, Émile Borel. God only knows what was going on when Émile thought about the infinite monkey theorem, right? But at the end of the day, this is what, when you look at the maths and you crunch this down, there is more chance that a monkey sitting at a keyboard for an infinite amount of time would generate a line from Shakespeare than they would an opening of Mozart's Marriage of Figaro. Now, this has been explored, and a composer, Sergey Prokofiev, really been thrown some names here, haven't I? Said we need not be afraid that there will come a time when all melodies have been exhausted and we shall be obliged to repeat old tunes. So this is melodies alone. We can't ever exhaust the possibilities of melody alone. Melody alone, one single component of what we might or might not have in the music that we write. And yet, a century ago, people who thought that they knew the future, who thought that their reality was reality, were worried about hitting the limits of music. Now, of course, when we look at it now, as I alluded to previously, there's technology involved. And electricity alone allowed us to move from acoustic instruments to adding electronic instruments into the fray. Electric guitar, Hammond organ, electric piano, and so on. And then innovation piled on top of that. Now we have synthesizers and samplers, and then innovation piled on top of that, software and DAWs. So if you think about it, we went acoustic to electric to design your own instrument, which you absolutely can with a synth and a sampler, to a whole new way of writing, new sequencers, computers, all of these different things. So new instruments, the ability to design instruments, new ways of writing music, and all of these stacked up on the near infinite possibilities of melody alone. And this was, of course, totally beyond any prediction or anything that anyone could even have vaguely considered 100 years ago. Their mind would be blown right now. Now imagine this. If you jump back only to the 80s, put yourself in the 80s. So we're in the realms of disco and synth pop, things that nobody ever considered would be a thing, right? Your mind would bend. It would blow your mind if someone played you rave or jungle music back then. Like, what the heck is this? And yet, by the end of that decade alone, this music was prevalent. Brand new, exciting, a whole explosion of new culture. Then say, okay, well, all right, let's take it to 1990. Now we've got all the electronic music. Surely there can't be anything left now. And sticking purely in the world of underground dance music, UK garage, happy hardcore, trip hop, drum and bass, big beat. Trance music, consider this, was barely a thing in 1990. Really, barely a thing. And yet, in just 3 years, Energy 52's classic trance anthem, Café Del Mar, came out. And around that time, trance music exploded. It was ginormous. Very different to anything that was heard before. Yes, you can draw some lines and similarities as we can all the way back through history, but very, very different. And even with all of that under our belt, we still had, in the future, dubstep, maybe dubstop's coming, maybe it's already out, I don't know, but dubstep, and that included, of course, Burial's iconic album, and he's gone on to push boundaries. If you listen to his music, it's absolutely incredible, and a lot of it is new. It takes sort of, uncharted territory. We go in new directions, and it would be remiss of me to only talk about underground dance music, because the same has happened with rock music as well, for example. That didn't seem to be going anywhere in the late 80s. And then along comes grunge and new metal, and they completely flipped the script. It's consistently happening with new things that feel fundamentally different, not just a little bit different to what went before. So if we consider that we could jump back to pretty much any point in history and go, well, that's it. That's surely it. That must be it. We think we've hit the frontiers of music, and then something fundamentally different comes out. It must then be a reasonable conclusion that perhaps we're just not seeing something. What exactly is differentiating us from the composers of old? We think that our truth is the truth. So did they. We can't see into the future, neither could they, and we have no idea whether there is something that we can't even conceptualize, we can't even imagine could exist, maybe just around the corner. Literally a few months from now, something could happen. We just don't know. Now, sure, there is a difference. There is a very clear difference. There is a lot more water under the bridge now than there was 100 years ago. But is it all of the water? And I think it would be very arrogant to believe that we've reached a point now where there is genuinely nothing new to discover under the sun. And at least not an optimistic way of looking at the future, is it? So I choose optimism, I choose wonder, I choose curiosity. What about you? As always, let me know. Hit me up on Instagram. Do you think that's it? We're done? It's all spent? Or do you think, yeah, we just can't possibly know, and it's worth constantly seeking out new ways to write music, new ways to reinvent things, finding out what experimental things are happening, keeping an eye on technology. Who knows what you might discover and what creative connection might come up that you say, well, I'm just going to try this thing. And then something comes out of it that you're like, oh my gosh, I couldn't possibly have predicted that. And you get to share that with the world. I think that's exciting. But maybe you think it's done, we're finished, that's as far as it goes. Not that it's the end of things, I can still make music and still thoroughly enjoy it, but there's no way that anyone's going to discover something new anymore. I would love to hear from you. I'm not saying definitely will, but I'm saying that I choose optimism, wonder and curiosity to move forward into the world of music with as my kind of values, if you like. So hit me up at I am Keith Mills on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. Show notes, as always, finishmoremusic.com/198. Do take care.